The first line you read should grab you so hard your chest tightens. I caught my girlfriend texting. She looked up, laughed, and said, "What are you gonna do? Break up with me?" That laugh hit me like a slap. It was the sound that split my world into before and after. In a single moment, everything that had felt stable and steady became suspect. Every shared plan suddenly fragile. If you've ever felt that sickening drop when trust evaporates, you know the heat of that instant, the skin prick of betrayal, the dizzying unfairness of being mocked while your heart is breaking. This is the story of that night, the slow burning that followed, and the quiet decision that changed me. It started ordinary, a cozy evening, a show playing softly, our legs tangled on the couch like we always did. We'd built a rhythm, little rituals that felt like proof that love was safe. Then her phone buzzed. At first, I didn't care, but the way her body changed, a stiffening, a stolen glance, the way her smile didn't reach her eyes, planted a seed of unease. Later, when she left the room and the phone sat face down, the temptation to look felt like a force of nature. I know I betrayed the unspoken rule, privacy matters, but when doubt gnaws at you, it can make you reckless with your own boundaries. I flipped the phone, read a string of messages that were quick, familiar, and intimate, words that belonged to someone who shared secrets with her in the small language lovers have, and my stomach turned as if someone had kicked it. When she returned and saw the phone in my hand, her face did something I hadn't seen before, first surprise, then a flash of guilt, then that laugh. It was dismissive and sharp, like a knife wrapped in sugar. I confronted her, voice shaky, trying to sound calm. I asked who Chris from work really was, why the nicknames, the late-night flirty lines. She rolled her eyes and laughed again, the same derisive sound, and in that laugh I heard 1,000 small betrayals, the nights she came home an hour late and said traffic, the times her stories about coworkers were too animated to be harmless, her smirk as she said, "What are you gonna do, break up with me?" felt like an insult to everything I'd invested in us. It wasn't a question asked from fear, it was a bet on my weakness, on the predictable script of me staying, pleading, forgiving. For a little while after, my mind became a wrestling ring for two truths, the history we shared, and the reality showed in her messages. Memories of laughter, travel, and midnight talks fought with the sting of seeing her affection given to someone else in tiny typed phrases. I replayed every moment, trying to spot the first thread of deceit. There were patterns, the offhand comments that later didn't hold up, sudden defensiveness when I asked simple questions, and that invisible boundary she built around certain parts of her phone life. I wanted to scream, to demand explanations, to break things, anything but the quiet collapse of dignity that comes with begging. The next morning I didn't explode. I made coffee. I sat across from her like a person who had been assigned to a task he didn't want but couldn't avoid. I told her calmly, with as much control as I could muster, that I had seen messages that weren't meant for me, that the tone was intimate and the timing suspicious. She laughed again, but the laugh had a new ingredient, condescension. "You're acting like this is the end of the world," she said, as though my pain were an overreaction. She expected me to grovel, to give her the chance to say sorry and mean it later, to let her off the hook. Instead, something inside me that had been quiet for too long stood up. I realized the fatigue of explaining myself to someone who treated my emotions like a TV show. I felt the brittle truth that love without respect is not love but a pattern of tolerating disrespect. Walking out wasn't cinematic, there was no dramatic slam or Shakespearean monologue. I packed what I needed, left a few things behind deliberately, and closed the door with hands that didn't shake as much as I'd feared. The first hours after leaving felt like the aftertaste of fear, raw, hollow, unreal. I called no one. I scrolled through messages like a surgeon going back over the incision, cataloging evidence, reminding myself why I left. People talk about closure as if it's something someone else can give you. It isn't. Closure is something you build from fragments, decisions kept, boundaries enforced, the slow repair of dignity. Days became a landscape of small reckonings. In the grocery aisle, I would see couples and feel a small, strange grief for the future we dreamed, not for her specifically, but for the version of me that would have stayed despite being disrespected. Sleep was jagged. Sometimes I would wake at 3 a.m., with 1,000 what-ifs like moths at a lamp, but within that discomfort grew a strange clarity. I began to recognize patterns in my own behavior, the moments I had smoothed over inconvenient truths for the sake of harmony, the times I labeled suspicion as jealousy, the way I had rationalized to keep peace. The heartbreak, ironically, became an honest mirror. I began to learn where my empathy had turned into self-erasure. People who love you will sometimes test the boundaries of what you'll accept. But there's a difference between navigating imperfections and tolerating intentional degradation. When she later texted, "I miss you," my first reflex was confusion. My second was an almost tender memory of what we'd had. Then I remembered her laugh, not the laugh between lovers, but the laugh of someone who sees you fall and steps over you. I realized that "I miss you" could be a convenience. A soft call when the warmth of familiarity was needed but not a bridge to true accountability. I didn't reply. And for the first time in a long time I felt the relief of not being the person who always patched things up. Anger came in waves, and I let it come. I journaled, not to prove anything to anyone but to watch my story become mine again. I talked to friends, and through their questions I found language for things I had avoided naming: emotional unavailability, boundary violations, the erosion of trust. It was painful to recount specifics, to watch supportive faces tighten when they realized what had been hidden. But those conversations also stitched me back together. I started saying no to things that felt small but were actually doorways to bigger compromises: late texts unanswered, plans that were always rescheduled, jokes at my expense that landed like little dismissals. Each refusal was a tiny reclamation. Eventually, the memory of her laughing while I was hurt stopped being an explosive ember and became a cold stone I could glance at without burning. It didn't mean I forgave or forgot. It meant I had integrated the lesson. I learned to value emotional consistency, to prize actions over sweet words, to recognize that intimacy is earned over time and cannot be claimed with a wink and a flirty text. I taught myself to ask for what I needed and to leave when the asking was met with mockery. That did not make me cruel. It made me honest. There were moments when I doubted my decision, when loneliness crept in. Old patterns whispered that at least with her, the chaos was familiar, but familiarity is a poor substitute for respect. I learned that independence is not a punishment you mete out to yourself after a breakup. It's a healing space where you relearn who you are when the noise of someone else's decisions is removed. I began to enjoy small things again: a walk without checking a phone, coffee in the morning without having to explain plans, music that fit my mood without apology. Those small freedoms were not grand gestures. They were the quiet scaffolding of a new life. Weeks after, I saw pictures of her at parties and heard through mutual friends about a new Chris from work being more visible. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated. A larger part wanted to be indifferent. Success and healing looked like not caring enough to gloat. When you walk away with your head up, the universe sometimes does the rest. I learned to let the story close without a dramatic final chapter, because some chapters simply end and the important thing is how you start the next one. If I could go back and give my past self one line of advice, it would be this: your response to betrayal should first protect your dignity and second protect your heart. Don't confuse mercy for courage. It takes real strength to leave when you still love, to accept that love does not require you to accept being disrespected. It is also okay to grieve what you thought you had. Grief is not a sign of failure. It is a sign you cared enough to be wounded. Let grief wash through you, then build something you wouldn't apologize for. In the months that followed, I found myself laughing again, not that brittle, mocking laugh that had once cut my bones, but honest laughter that came from friends, from new experiences, and from quiet moments when I recognized my own resilience. I dated, but cautiously. I set boundaries early and watched for consistency. I was surprised to find that honesty attracts people who can match it. The relationships that followed were imperfect in the best ways. They required work, true communication, and the mutual giving of trust rather than demands for it. So when she once asked, smirking, "What are you gonna do? Break up with me?" the answer was simple: I chose myself. That choice did not erase the sting or the betrayal, but it created a life where my worth wasn't a bargaining chip, where laughter wasn't used as armor to dodge responsibility, and where respect wasn't optional. If you find yourself in that place, caught, hurt, laughed at, know that you have the power to change the ending. Walk away if you must. Stay only if what you are offered is real. And if you leave, do it with the quiet confidence that the person you become on the other side is worth protecting. This is not a story about revenge. It's about reclaiming the small, steady things that build a life: dignity, honesty, and the courage to refuse harm even when leaving costs you what you love. When someone laughs at your pain, let that laughter be the signal you need to choose differently. The laugh that once meant disaster can become the exact moment you decide to live better, more honest, more self-respecting, and, ultimately, freer.